afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to another Airport Show Insights webinar. My name is Daniel Qureshi, and I'm a Group Exhibition Director at Reed Exhibitions Middle East, organizers of the Airport Show. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you find today's discussion on the role of remote towers in future air traffic management exciting and informative. Over the last few months, through our webinars, we have documented the worst ever decline in global air travel and hoped our webinars would help our stakeholders continue navigating through this crisis. From its lowest point in April 2020, when global passenger demand was 94% below the same period last year, we are today at about 50% below 2019 levels. We all hope to see these numbers improve as travel restrictions are further lifted across the world. As we look towards brighter days, hopefully ahead for our industry, our discussion today centers around the development of remote towers over the last 20 years and why we expect significant growth in the coming decades. We're pleased to be joined today by 5 leading experts in this sector from Saab, Micronav, and Think Research. I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Connor Mullen, who is the co-founder and managing director of UK-based air traffic management and airports consultancy Think Research. Connor has over 20 years of air traffic management experience and is recognized as an authority on remote tower research and implementation across several projects worldwide. I'm sure you will enjoy his insights during this discussion. Before I pass on the mic to Connor, a reminder please to post your questions in the Q&A window, and we will try to get to as many of these during the webinar or at the end as possible. I'd also like to request all the other speakers to kindly keep their mics on mute until called upon by Connor. Thank you very much, and Connor, over to you.
Thanks, Daniel, and welcome everybody to what we hope will be an interesting and informative webinar on remote towers or digital towers, if you prefer to call them that. I expect for quite a few of you, this won't be your first ever remote tower webinar, and for some of you, it might not even be your first webinar on remote towers this summer. But what attracted me to this one in particular was the title, The Role of Remote Tower. We're not here to talk about, if you like, the basics, screens and cameras and so on. We're here looking at the future and focusing on that important aspect, the role of remote towers. We'll also tie in the part simulators play in remote tower, and also maybe even look at closing the loop a little on another topic that we've spoken about in the past on remote simulations. And we'll top it off with a live stream from a remote tower center in Sweden. Daniel alluded, my company's been involved in remote tower research and implementation for over 10 years, and we've supported ANSPs, airport suppliers on 5 continents now, and we've helped them try and figure out how or if remote towers can help their operations. To give a bit of context to what we're going to talk about today, a couple of months ago, we launched a digital tower or remote tower tracker, where we tried to capture every remote or digital tower project underway across the world. It's as good a snapshot as any of the current state of the market and where the concept is at. And it's useful to help look at digital towers or remote towers in context. If you're interested, you can find it on our website. What we see from it is that publicly, we have 26 nations publicly considering some partial or full digital tower service. That's the public ones. There are many more who are looking at it less publicly. And even if we look at those public ones, we can add up to over 70 known airports who are considering a fully or partially digital future. So already it's quite a big number of people thinking about it. However, when we get down to actual operational sites, the number shrinks dramatically. There are around 8 airports currently who receive some sort of air traffic service via digital or remote means. And when we break that down further in terms of places you can go and see and visit, we have a remote tower center with 4 airports in it. After that, we have high profile examples like Budapest and Leipzig. And then really you're into contingency military ones you might not be able to go and actually see. And this is what we, I think, have historically called the remote tower paradox. It's both incredibly popular, yet still quite rare. So we have to make sense of this. And to try and make sense of it, we have a number of questions. For example, how can something that we've spent the last 10 years talking about still be considered the future? Why is it such a hot topic, yet still apparently so rare? And why, having attended remote tower webinars over the years, why is 2020 important? Why is its role in the future important right now? And actually the answer is potentially as simple as quite basic mathematics. We talk about remote tower, we talk about, we use phrases like as a hot topic, exponential growth and so on. And actually when we look at things like exponential growth, we consider this very rapid expansion, this rapid growth. But in any exponential curve like we have on the screen here, again in simple mathematics, we have what we call a lag phase. Every exponential growth starts with this phase, and you can see actually that it's quite slow, prolonged growth. We call this the lag phase, and it's what we need to get to the next phase, the phase that we, in a headline phase, more often think about as exponential growth. So after that, very long in the future, we'll get this leveling off phase. But right now, we want to think about it. Let's look at that lag phase. And again, taking the data from our tracker, what we can see is if we plot the data from our tracker and we plot it over time and the number of implementations like we would in a graph, we get these what look like fairly randomly scattered dots, whether there was a contract or award, whether there were trials taking place, or whether there were actual implementations. And what do you know, if we plot a trend line against those, we see this slow but yet rising growth that we would expect to see as we are on the cusp of exiting this lag phase and entering into this exponential growth phase. So we see that we are on that, we think anyway, we're on that brink. Here right now in 2020, we think that in the next year, 2 years, we're going to enter that next phase, that exponential growth phase. And actually, in ATM research and development, 10 years is about right for this lag phase. So I think that, I say, it helps not only explain this remote tower paradox, but actually make it seem quite logical as well. And in terms of what that means for the future, yeah, we've been talking about it for a while. The concept's been around for a while, but we're leaving that lag phase. We're on the cusp now of entering what would, in all our heads, more traditionally think of that exponential growth phase. Whilst the topic of digital towers or remote towers has been around for a while, we haven't yet felt the true impact of it because we're in that phase. But in this next phase, we will and we must start to see the impact of remote towers, something really tangible back from them. But we've got this 10 years of learning, and what we can learn from that is that they're not a foregone conclusion. Yes, we can talk about technical configurations and functionalities and screens and modes of operation, but that's almost a, that's by the by. Whatever way you want it to do, trust me, you will find a supplier to supply it. The important thing is the role of remote towers. That is not a foregone conclusion. That is the bit that you, the users, you get to define that. That's the important part. And so with that last line as a context, I'd like to take you into the next parts of this webinar, and I'd like to hand over to David Shomar. David is Vice President at Saab, and he's going to give us an introduction to the concept as he sees it. So David, it's over to you.
Thank you, Connor, to you and to Think Research for moderating this very timely panel. I want to also thank Dubai Airport Show, Reed Exhibitions for putting this on. It really is very timely in so many ways. It's so appropriate, in my mind, that we're featuring remote or digital or virtual tower on actually a platform where individuals from all around the world will get to virtually experience this relatively new technology in air traffic control. It's also timely because of the need within the air traffic control towers to deal with the effects of COVID-19, from physical distancing to training, from modernization to handling much lower numbers of movements at airports. So what started really as an idea in Sweden in 2009 as a means to handle remote airports with few movements a week, this has developed into an air traffic control evolution. We've evolved. If we were to brand this technology today after witnessing what we've been able to actually do with it, we probably would have changed the name remote to digital, to futuristic, or state of the art, or even Zoom air traffic control. It really has changed things. Digital tower has digitalized basically the eyes of the controller, Connor. This way, we freed the data to be shared by all the stakeholders in the airport. So we are freeing this data from the shackles of the physical tower, where the tower itself is the only place where you can see this data, to be used no matter where the geographic location of the controller is, and all the other stakeholders as well. So this webinar is really exciting for those like me who find this topic as interesting as I do. You guys are in for a real treat. This is the first time we're going to be showing live a digital tower control center that controls more than one airport. This is going to be exciting. Like Connor said in his opening slides, digital tower is the present and the future of ATC control. The best sentiments I heard that describe how I feel about this exciting technology is by Charles Kettering. He's an inventor. He said, "My interest in the future is because I'm going to spend the rest of my life in it." So with that, Connor, I think that we are going to be in for an exciting time. I turn it back to you.
Just to pick up briefly, you said, in 2009, we christened this thing Remote Tower, and if we were to rename it today, we'd call it something different. I mean, one of the ways we quite often look at it is when we were first building an operational concept around technology that we knew what we felt would work anyway, we put that title Remote Tower at the top. And from that, we made little children called single, multiple, and contingency. And that was our family tree with Remote Tower at the top. I guess if we look back now, we wouldn't necessarily put Remote Tower at the top with those three children. Maybe Remote Tower itself is a child in that family tree. Where do you see, if you like, what's the DNA of this concept? How far can it go?
As any new technology comes about or a new invention that the human race comes up with, what starts as an idea ends up developing and taking root in all sorts of different directions. And you're absolutely correct. Remote tower now, if we look back at it, shouldn't have been the father or the top of the tree, as you put it, but it should have been one of the children in there. Because we've developed so many different ways to use this technology that it turns out that we can improve air traffic control tremendously for controllers, giving them tools they'd be able to use that they didn't have before. One quick one would be the P2Z camera, which basically takes the binoculars to a completely different new level, for example, or the air traffic, your tags for your aircrafts flying with the aircraft right onto the screen instead of actually having to use electronic freight strips or paper strips for that matter. So as things developed, it turned out that really this is more of a digital revolution. We're taking the digital revolution that has hit so many different parts of the human society into now the air traffic control environment. And that's basically where we're at. So I would say, yeah, you're absolutely correct. Where we're heading with this here is finally there is an actual digital system within the tower itself that digitalizes the eyes of the controller, but it also can have input from all the other digital systems into that system, thereby giving the controller one complete picture right in front of them that they can control without having to look at so many different screens with so many different systems.
Excellent. Thank you, David. I think for me, that's one of the key things. Once you remove, if you like, those fixed perceptions and those fixed boundaries of what you can see just with a scan of your head and with your eyeballs, once you digitalize it, you open up so many possibilities and so many boundaries. And to explain how Saab are implementing that, we're going to hand over to Niklas Gustafsson, who is the Vice President of Business Development and Government Affairs at Saab Digital Air Traffic Solutions, or ESTA. I just want to put out a quick reminder. Everybody watching today should have a link, or will get a link to a survey. And if you get a chance to fill in that survey, it'd be very much appreciated by us and indeed the organizers of this webinar. So please do fill in that survey when you get a chance. The link will appear somewhere soon. So Nicholas, I'd like to hand over to you and hear what you have to say about how Saab in particular are developing this remote tower concept. Nicholas.
Thank you, Conor. I'm going to give you a talk on where we are and a little bit how we see the future and the role of remote tower, as you said. Been spending the last 10 years in the gap towards the expansion of this. And before this, I think we are all looking at this COVID situation with all the constraints. For me and many of us, this digital tower remote started as a way to reduce cost and create efficiency and in areas where it was difficult to do normal towers. But I think where we are right now in a role, it's not only that. I think we have a landscape changing for many reasons. The crisis, the drones is coming and it has to be integrated, and the UTMs, there are electrical flights, there are autonomy in general in our society. The environment will not go away, it's still there. The electrical flights, and I think of course, we have a generation of people who is digital from birth, and we keep saying this, that has an impact, and we see it already, that the acceptance of using digital tools and so on increases and make it happen. And also, you probably will not only see this as a tower, it will be part of a rolling sort of system of infrastructure. And I had the little 5G dot there, and also that the other communication means are working in this direction. So from Saab side, we tend to want to look at it a little bit more holistic. There are things changing that we need to consider when looking at the remote and digital towers. I use digital remote as it is. You all know what it means, and we stopped having that discussion. We'll see in the end. But I think, okay, what this drive is from, from today, mostly about, except these 8 towers that Conor mentioned. They are fixed towers. They are there. You need to permanently make them there and difficult to change. The staff will always be on site. It's a little bit unflexible, and you need to plan that, and it's difficult to plan. The mobility, this was from a military discussion, also a little bit limited, and the security is limited in that sense. And to train, to come into that later, and even to recruit in some areas is a challenge. And of course, these towers are sort of islands on the airports. They have the local procedures and the local culture. And I think what we spend the last 10 years is trying to move from centralized ways of working, where you have cameras and sensors on site and the staff is in the center, which means that you can use them more flexibly. You can have digital environment where you have information shared and in a much different ways, and you have safety nets and tools, etc. And of course, one of the things the last years moving to implementation, this integrated training has been sort of absolutely one of the key things that we've seen, how you can use your staff today for operations, and tomorrow you have 3 hours of training, you go back again, and so forth. Even had a discussion yesterday, well, if you were in a military environment, you can do tactical training in another module while the traffic is gone or the weather is bad. And you can harmonize your procedures between airports and the ways of working, just very sort of things. There's probably a long list of things in your minds as users on the role of remote towers. And at Saab, we're trying to find and talk and understand about these things. So just to make it clear, this is from the first airport that went live in 2015, and Eric will show you live from this. So I just wanted to sort of, it is a digital working environment, and it may look a little bit like a tower in digital, but once you have passed this and went on to have it on screens, there are things you can do. And the best developers and innovators we have today at Saab is all this operational staff that's doing work on a daily basis, and you can see things. Sometimes you thought that was the way it's going to go, sometimes not. And one thing we learned definitely, less is more. It's not that you need too much things on the screens. They are professionals, they do their work, and they do it basically the same as they do, with like the different tools. So that's one part of the remoteness. You have a center of towers with digital screens. Oops, it's upside down. Another one is, of course, the skyline that will change. Sorry for that being on that way. It means that the way towers looks like, we spent a lot of time. How can you keep the cameras there in the best place, in the best ways, and protect them from weather and wind, and also keep it maintained over the years. And actually, some of the things have been around for almost 5-6 years with, I think, no cameras change and very limited maintenance. So I think we've done a good job there. And maybe a little bit of industrial design as we move on. It will be a new skyline at the airports. The one on the left side, looking a little bit strange, is the London City, where you put even an architectural way of looking at the towers, and just going live shortly here during the fall. So that's a digital skyline at the airports happening. Another thing from our side, which we thought a lot about when we started to innovate and work on digital remote tower, is there any way you can combine being a supplier of technology, but also an ANS provider? So when Eric will show you Saab Digital Air Traffic Solution, we said, let's see if there's maybe one way we can provide both services and technology in a service-oriented package for those who want and find it useful, in order to drive also the change and the business model a little bit. So when we do things and develop things and market things, we do that based on our own operational experience, and then you can add that to the enhancements for the controllers and our customers. So that's another way of how digital things can impact and how we see it. Then, of course, if you look at the center of towers, it's something we've seen, and this is a picture, but it's roughly the way it looks we're going to see up in Sweden, and the new center in Stockholm, and the way it's going to look like in other areas. You have a number of modules where you can have regional airports working set there. You can have large airport for contingency with more controller working positions. You can have your integrated training. You can have your joint supervision and planning of the assets, the human assets, and also the technical assets in that sense. That's the basic stuff. In our case, you can have up to 24 airports. You can have multiple airport controlling. You can do cross-border things, and you can integrate and update your system as you move along. Then if you look at it, the red ones is something we just trying to understand. Okay, if you have a center with information, you have people, it's manned, and you can flexibly open and close airports, then there are things you can consider having there to support on the airport and CDM. How will this interact with the airport procedures? The role of the UATM and the UAM, they might also have ways of use that information, and cybersecurity as well could be sort of monitored here and in a flexible way. And of course, you can have a spare module if something fails and so on. So this is our belief that the future will be like en route. You will have centers of tower supporting the development or the services in a much more flexible way. You will visit Eric in the center of Sundsvall, which is, of course, something which now is taking over by Saab to operate it on an industrial sort of basis, with a lot of visitors coming and being there. It's our development ground where we test both from the human factors perspective, but technically. But now also the second center to the right here in Stockholm is a purpose-built center with up to 20 airports from a center where it's designed for 24/7 operations and not development. Just keep the things going, both for civil and military, based on the same technology and the same concept. And to the right, we're just in the middle of giving birth to a center in the Netherlands as well, based on the same procedures and technology. And those sort of jointly forms and making it happen. And I hope when we sit here in 1 or 2 years' time, it will not be 8 here, it will maybe 12 or 15 in that sense. And you'll see it. It's sort of, for us, it's important to make it happen. To see is to believe, and not just talking or PowerPointing. It's making it happen and be prepared for this takeoff in the number of airports. Eric will continue to talk about this, but just some clear indication what if let's assume that these centers were now tailor-made for low dense or flexible operation in a post-COVID or a COVID situation. And I'll let Eric continue, but it's clear here that the training and keeping the competence in a center where you can go in and train and mix real traffic with simulated traffic is absolutely key to keep going. And the simulator or trainer is one of the key areas of that, and to keep it open and keep the competence, because you lose your edge if there's not so much traffic and so on. And also the other one we see in this multi-endorsement, where you can work in different airports in different days, so 2 at the same time, which we call multiple airport control, or MAC, which today isn't fully used. But now with this in the hindsight, this is a priority that needs to go up and put it really into operation according to plan. And the other one is also the vulnerability of sickness and so on. I'll let Eric continue, but me from a business perspective, we made some studies and tried this. And if we had a fully everything as with training and flexibility, maybe in some areas and sometimes you could do with 30% of your staff just to keep that low traffic. Not saying it's going to be like that permanently, but you could sort of have the flexibility to keep the operations going.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Just last one. You can do more with less in a Saab remote tower. There's a development going on, working with, you see on the screen. And also we see the same thing as Conor see, the COVID will drive the curve to the left. Thank you very much, Connie.
Thanks, Nicholas. Just to put a couple of questions to you. Whenever we think about remote or digital towers, it's very easy to quickly go down a rabbit hole of technology and ask lots of technology questions because it's so tangible. But I guess if we think about the role of remote towers, we should think about the operational role and maybe even the business role. We see that there's lots of collaborations with LFV and Saab, with SDATS, with DFS and Frequentis and AirSense, and of course Seeridge being part owned by NavCam and NATS. So from a more operational point of view, will the role of a controller change from remote tower?
I think in general, it will not change. It's a professional work that you do. You separate aircraft, you follow the procedures and follow the same story. You train and keep it going. Let Eric comment on this one. That said, over the time, the tools will get better, the flexibility will be there, and they will learn new procedures, and you can maybe work on large airport in a more flexible way and smaller airport doing it the same way. But I think the controlling is still the same handicraft that you do. But if we sit here in 10 years' time, we probably have come to a point what you can do differently and so on. I don't think the gadgets you can implement will drive that. It's the human that will say, okay, fine, I'm ready for doing this now.
Quick question, hopefully a quick answer as well. Will the role of suppliers change? You yourselves have become certified to provide air traffic services.
Yeah, I think we will be, first of all, we're looking at this more service orientation, as I mentioned. I think we will also broaden our portfolio to be able to take care of a bigger share of this digital change, being the UTMs or being the drones, being the areas of electrical flights and so on. That's what I see. We will have a broader portfolio and hopefully doing a more wider delivery.
Thank you very much, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Before I hand over to Greg from Micronav, there's one question which was asked on the panel, which I think probably fits in for an answer right now. And the question was, is there any limitation to maximum air traffic movements per hour that can be handled remotely? And if I can answer that very quickly, we might come back to it later. The answer is we don't know yet. We have implemented this in some very, very small aerodromes. It's currently being trialed in very large aerodromes, Changi for one. The largest operational site, I think, is Budapest. Whenever we did this first, we didn't necessarily see a capacity. It was almost a, give us a problem and we'll solve it. We will try and come up with a technology that will meet the capacity. So there isn't a number. Quite often with remote tower, everybody wants a number. We don't yet have a number. It's more of a pushing the envelope. But so far, it's worked with most operational environments we've thrown at that. So I hope that answers the question from earlier. Going to introduce Greg now, Greg Pyle, who's the Managing Director of Micronav. And Greg is going to talk about the role of simulations, and in particular, the role of simulations in remote tower. Greg, over to you.
Thanks very much, and hello to everyone. It's good to be here, and I see we've got a pretty good audience, so good interest, which gives a flavor of, as David was saying earlier, you know, these are the times that technologies like this will help us to improve and get things done in a more collaborative way, actually. Remote digital towers. Our title is that we don't know which way the industry's gone. We've heard different people talking about digital versus remote. We have the advantage that we've been, you know, actually producing digital towers for more than 2 decades, although they've been used for simulation purposes. But now the technology is starting to mature, and we're starting to see them coming closer together. So one of the things that I wanted to raise is that real-time data is really improving our operations. The remote digital tower has changed the ATM industry forever, and there is no denying the benefits that come along with that. Not only are we able to have more flexibility for more airports more quickly, but we're also able to really make use of having different thinking in the way that we can apply both the operational delivery of the tower solution, but also the training. The digital tower has significantly improved the tools available to the tower controller, and one of the challenges that we have has been to actually keep up and find a balance between going down the path of one OEM's answer to a problem versus trying to provide a training solution that could be fit for multiple end users with multiple systems. Obviously, we're system agnostic. We have a fantastic relationship with Saab. I'm going to come on to a later part of the presentation that will show a success story there. But there are sometimes more than one way to achieve the same delivery of information to a controller, and that's one of the challenges that we face. One of the other things that comes up quite often for us is augmented digital displays. You know, we think that there is still a long way to go in terms of being able to understand how much data that can be delivered to an end user. We have some trials that have gone on with regards to monitoring the ability for humans to interact in a radar environment, and we do things like monitor the eye tracking and the human factors, the pulse, the stress levels of individuals. I think that there's still some work to do in the remote towers to understand how far we can take people in terms of having multiple airports and the traffic densities. But coming to answer the question a bit on behalf of, or in response to the question that came out that Nicholas was asked is, you know, our simulators are used to actually find out how far an operation can go. So whilst they're not actual digital towers of live traffic, one of the interesting uses for a simulator is saying, well, actually, you know, what is the traffic load that we can push the operation to? And more importantly, how do we make sure that those procedures are evaluated in a really robust but safe way? And that's where simulation can help. Augmented digital overlays, they can display a wide range of information in the field of vision of the controller. Again, we think that there is still some work to do to understand exactly what the right perfect answer is to that, and it's an evolution. I think that the industry has come a long way in the last 10 years. I think it still has a way to go, and with simulation, you're able to rapidly prototype the different presentations of data to an end user, again, without impacting the operation. In BEST, our simulator, we believe, can help control and adapt to the adaptation of the new technology. And as I said previously, the associated procedures in a safe environment. This to us is really key. You know, you want to have buy-in to your end users. You want to ensure change management is delivered in a very manageable way. And simulators are one of the key platforms that we see end users, not only from digital towers, but general ATM change operations are much more successful in our experience when simulation has been part of the journey. And obviously we can support training of controllers to operate multiple airports simultaneously. This was actually a job that we did for our customer in Dubai, where they wanted to be able to train the Al Maktoum and the Dubai International simultaneously, connected with an ATM system. And again, although we're here talking specifically about the digital towers, we mustn't forget there's an airspace that goes along with the digital tower. So having a fully integrated multiple tower with an en route and approach system in one big center is where you could go. That's one option. And we're very, well, we've seen some really good results in the way that those types of applications have been used. But one of the key benefits that we think is that simulation safeguards your operational change. So BEST delivers the transition, or in fact, simulation delivers the transition between normal and remote digital tower operations. We do know in the early days of the digital tower and remote tower, there was a view that you needed to put people directly into the tower because simulation wasn't quite there. And in fact, that's true. 10 years ago, I think simulation was good, but it wasn't as advanced as it is today. Manufacturers are getting better. So the level of immersion that's coming is of a much higher standard these days. We think that if you do have a simulator, you need to have one that can be used for more than just the training element. You know, there's research, evaluation. The training is, of course, one of the key elements, but it has to be a flexible solution in terms of the simulator. You know, you must make sure that you provide a realistic scenario that can be quickly created and tested with your end users if you're having a high change program. And having a flexible simulator that can do any element of ground or air operations is really, really important. You also need the ability to have unlimited variations of scenarios, which you can run very, very quickly in a matter of minutes. And that's because controllers are expensive, engineers are expensive. And when you go into use a simulator, yes, you have the canned training scenarios, but you also want to make best use of the time in the simulator. And so if you have something that can do rapid prototyping in this kind of environment, we think that that's very valuable. You also need to think that you need to have all types of air and ground procedures that can be prototyped. You don't want to find a simulator where an end user is feeling stunted in their ability to complete certain tasks. And that becomes especially tricky in the area of the VTOL aircraft that are becoming more and more prevalent now with drones and for military operations, but also with rotary wing system or rotary wing aircraft. You know, you need to ensure that you have very accurate representation of the flight profiles, but also being able to manage a multiple or a high level of traffic that have those different flight capabilities is very key to a good simulator. So those are some of the things that I would encourage people to think about when going into looking at a simulator that is compatible with the end user demand of what a digital tower will need in the future. Because whilst we're aware that at the moment there are a limited number of airports in the world today that are using this, we are absolutely convinced that this is the future. You know, it's going to be mainstream for main hub airports in the future, and we need to make sure that we're ready for that.
Thanks, Greg. If I can just interrupt with a couple of questions. I know you've got some more slides, but in the interest of keeping momentum going, I just, well, I want to interrupt, I suppose. So very quick question, really. You touched on it yourself. We've done a lot of simulations here, over 100 or so in the last few years, human-in-the-loop simulations. Quite often there seems to be two camps. There's like an ANSP or an airport will buy a training simulator, or they'll buy a research and development simulator. And quite often the two don't mix. We see one or other, and it's often that we'll do training in one simulator and we'll develop procedures, airspace, new concepts and systems on a completely different platform. Is that necessary?
No, I would say it's not necessary, but you do need to think about the design of the simulator when you do purchase it. You have glass, you have desks, you have in the example of the display or the image I've just put up. This is at Taoyuan International, which all of the systems that you see in that display are Saab systems being stimulated by data from BEST. If there was another piece of glass that Saab was providing that you wanted to evaluate, or another version of the software that you wanted to evaluate, you could very rapidly in a simulator take yourself from a generic system to a full life representative system to an R&D platform all on the same day. But you need to make sure that that design is in place from day one.
So I know you've got a couple more slides, and it'd be great to see those quickly before we switch over to Eric. So we've got a couple of minutes here before we go live.
Great.
Eric's got the technical challenge, so I don't want to hold him up. So
yeah.
Tell us a bit about.
A little bit, but I'll just give you a quick overview. The picture you saw before, as I said, was in the Tower Sim. We did an integrated solution with Saab at Taiwan with the ANWS. Fantastic customer to work for. We managed to deliver that in record time from our perspective in terms of an integrated solution. The engineers between the Saab team and the Micronav team, actually within 3 months, we had a full integration of the software up and running. And it's a simulator that gives a 360 projected view, pilots all the normal simulation data with the Saab workstations. This image here, you can see the height of the screen is quite important. The guys wanted to have a replication of their new operational tower. So we spent time making sure that we gave them the right perspective and the right level of detail in the tower. That image is a little washed out in the background because these pictures have been taken with a flash, but I can tell you that the end users are very happy both with the Saab product, which allows them to deliver the operation, but also with our simulator, which allows them to do the training and evaluation. We did the normal kind of data interfaces, the Asterix feeds, the AFTN feeds, nav-edge statuses, etc., with full lighting control. So that all of the ATM tools the controller would need are present in the simulator. And we delivered the project in less than 12 months, which was an enabler both from Saab and Micronav to help the end users turn the tower on in time. So we're happy that we were able to do that. If we come to some more generic, Micronav has been developing its own ITWP. This is for another airport in the UK, where we have all of the integrated tools, and you can do the PTZ. You can see here we've got a generic interface for the ATCO, which allows them to do all of the things that you would expect a controller to be able to do. And this is a very rapidly prototyped. That display that you see the user interfacing with there can be managed within a day. We can have that reconfigured to look like somebody else's airfield. Obviously, we can run multiple towers with multiple outputs, so you can see that you could have a similar configuration as to the Saab team have, and we have also all the kinds of data that you would expect to see. Coming to the future, we've started to play with, and this is where I talk about the generic capabilities and the generic tools for a controller. This is an image at Heathrow. None of this is representative of any one OEM's tools, but we can rapidly make those changes to make them look like an OEM's tools if needs be, or we can stimulate. So the kind of things we're thinking about is how do we put interesting data onto the display to provide a data-rich environment for a trainee, but without overloading them. So that's something that we want to work with industry to find the right balance. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. I know in the early days.
Apologies, I went on too long.
Sorry, I know in the early days of remote tower research, we almost avoided simulation because the very thing we wanted to look at, which was the visual reproduction, by simulating it, you took that away. So it was very hard to justify the use of simulation. As we can see from your images here, the more we go towards an advanced digital aerodrome and add in all these technological enablers and support tools, actually the role of simulation, I think, becomes much more important for prototyping and HMI. I just want to remind everybody again about the survey. To fill it in, there's a link being shared on the chat. And I think now we should switch over and try the technologically challenging part of this webinar, which is switch to the Remote Tower Center with Eric Bachmann, who is the Chief of Operations at SDATS. So over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much. Hope you can see me now. I'm standing in the RTC Center in Sundsvall. I'm using a selfie stick and my cellular phone, so it might be a little bit shaky, but I will do my very best. The RTC Center in Sundsvall has now been in operations for 5.5 years. The first airport was Örnsköldsvik Airport, who was a small regional airport in the middle part of Sweden. During the COVID-19, these small regional airports have had big, severe economic, financial, traffic impact on the airports. For the moment, we're only operating one of the airports, that is Linköping City Airport, in which we're going to visit some controllers. The other two airports are only open in the evening for one turnaround flight. Just make me swap. This is Örnsköldsvik Airport, the first airport in the world, actually, in which we operated. Initially, when we started the project, a lot of things was focused on looking down on the desk, using the electronic fly strip, the radar screen, and the IDP control in which you maneuver AGL lights and so on. The screens, the visual parts, is more or less a glass window as you have in a tower, but they are a little bit unfolded in a view about 225 degrees. So the controllers still perform the same air traffic service as they did before, but are using the tools in the desks more to operate them. Side by side with Örnsköldsvik, we have Sundsvall Airport as well. Sundsvall Airport is the place in which the RTC Center is located. Normally, Sundsvall Airport has traffic to around 3 to 4 airports in Sweden, also domestic flights during the summer. Technology-wise, it's the same technology that the controller use, and that has been helpful for the controllers to operate more airports. Most of the controllers working in the RTC, they have endorsements for 2 airports, and one guy has endorsement for 3 airports. And that has been the key success for us to keep a low staffing in the center. These 4 airports are normally operated only by 16 controllers. Greg mentioned before, I just need to move over in the RTC Center. Greg mentioned before that simulator is a must-have. For me, the simulator has been the crucial thing for us to be successful to open up this new airport in Sweden called Scandinavian Mountains Airport. Scandinavian Mountains is a ski slope airport located in the Swedish mountains. It's open seasonally, meaning it's open up in December and closes in April. And it's also the second generation of the Saab remote tower system. The changes we have made to the second one from the first one I previously shown you is we tried to move things away from the desk to be more presented on the screens. For instance, the PTZ interaction is fully operated from the screen now instead from the IDP control. This airport will run simulation during this last autumn. It was 5 controllers who had their license in other airports that performed training for 2.5 weeks. And by that, we was able to have an approval from the regulator in Sweden to start service on the 22nd of December 2019. Now we're going to visit the one and only airport in operations. This is Linköping City Airport, in which we have 2 controllers working for the moment. That is Pauline and Sanna. Linköping City Airport is a military one, in which Saab do the trials on the military aircrafts. Do you have any traffic now, Pauline?
No, next departure is in approximately 1 hour.
Okay, quick question for you. How do you feel to work in the RTC Center?
I enjoy it a lot. Thank you.
Do you think that a simulator might help you in performing your service?
Yes, definitely. Especially practicing unfamiliar situations. It will be really good for us.
Thank you, Pauline. Sorry, I need to turn back.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, so for us working in the RTC Center, a simulator is crucial to keep the competence of the controllers during a pandemic burst, or if you have some kind of other issues that you need to still keep a high capacity of the controller. I think that in the future, focus should be on having more simulators spread around so we can use knowledge from different remote tower centers to be able to share experience with each other using a simulator one. Well, that's about it. I've seen a lot of questions. I saw a question about the capacity. I do say as Connor, we have approval for a single runway operation. It's more about the airport capacity than the controller capacity. If, for instance, we had a big apron, we can handle as much traffic as possible. Next step for us in the RTC is to use the simulator and start the multiple operations. Multiple operations will happen, and it will definitely happen for Örnsköldsvik and Sundsvall Airport. By that, it doesn't mean that it's a generic one that works for all airports around the world, but Örnsköldsvik and Sundsvall Airport, they do have a traffic pattern that's mixed perfectly together in the multiple operations. So next part of the journey for us in the RTC has started. Thank you, Connor.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you very much for the tour. Technologically risky, but you handled it well. Well done. So I'm going to take some questions now that you've asked through the Q&A feature. I can probably say, if it's okay with the organizers, that everybody who's asked a question, I can promise you will get at least a written response if we don't discuss it now. I promise we will answer every question somehow or other. But to pick up on the questions that have been asked, I've got one for the panel, and then Eric, I'm going to come back to you for a question as well. So looking at the most common question, the ones that are top ranked, they all converge around the topic of artificial intelligence. So we have remote tower, we've gone digital. Once things are digitalized, we can start to do clever things with them. So what are your views? This is maybe for David and Nicholas initially. What are your views on the use of artificial intelligence in digital towers?
I can maybe start. I saw there was a lot of questions in this area. Of course, I think if you start with the yes, the AI will have an impact and have a role definitely in the remote tower center and the digital tower evolution. At the same time, we had a lot of sort of thinking this to crawl before you walk and so on. So from our side, try to keep it simple and basic and get into operation. first, and then start to add new features as we move along based on the experience that the ERIC has and the other customers have. And that said, I think in our Saab pipeline, there's a lot of work and discussion going on how and what will be the first AI-like things that will be introduced. We will take it stepwise in a cautious thing to make sure it doesn't impact the way the regulatory aspects of it. But definitely, it's an area. It's evident that there will be things. It might be your little advisor that pops up. It might be on the surveillance and identification side. It might be all these kind of things, how you use the digital information to support ERIC and others' operations. I just, from our side, it's there and it worked, and we will not oversell it in the beginning, but if we see the evolution of the roadmap, AI has a clear role, of course.
Yeah. I think we're seeing, because quite often when we have, I mean, there's no doubt the digital environment is different to sitting in a normal tower. And there are those who would argue it's better. There's those who would argue it is worse, that it has a detrimental impact on human performance. But what we can do is we can bring in new enablers to plug any gaps that do appear, we can plug them in. And particularly from artificial intelligence, we're seeing their use in things like safety nets, because with machine learning, we can see how they can spot things using visual recognition that maybe alert us and so on. So the safety net for me is one of the very interesting ways in which artificial intelligence would help. Obviously, and again, to come back to the questions with things like this, we have...
Connor, if I can add something here.
Sure, dear. Fire away.
So, technology is advancing at a very, very rapid speed. Not only remote or digital tower technology, but all technologies are advancing at a very, very rapid speed. And we're digitalizing everything in the practical world. And AI is a revolution on top of a revolution going into that. So no question about it, it's going to have a great impact. But a successful transition from where you are today to where you need to be or you'd like to be in the future is the actual view that Saab has taken in developing this technology. What do I mean by that? Air traffic control depends mostly, the most important thing for air traffic control is safety, period. That's it. That's why they're there, it's safety. And therefore, you don't want to jeopardize any part of safety. You want to enhance safety as you move into new technologies. So we've taken the long view at Saab that what you need to do as first, when we first started designing the system, was not to change the operational procedures or the environmental conditions of the controller. Meaning, we don't want the controller not only to take on new challenges with the new tools, but we don't want them also to have to relearn new procedures on how to operate their airspace. So we didn't go with 1,000,001 screens. We went with the exact same look that the controller has in the tower, one out the window display. And also the environment that they were in. We didn't want to change that. We wanted them to sit down with a 360 degrees looking exactly that would in the past, because it helps that technology. It doesn't mean we're not moving into additional technologies such as AI and incorporated that. That's going very quickly. But the concept is, if you want to be successful, take baby steps. Don't overwhelm the system. And remember, air traffic control is about safety, number one, and number two, and number three.
Thanks, David. Eric, a question for you. And again, everybody else can contribute. But you mentioned, obviously with the airports there you have in the remote tower center, during the pandemic, it allowed you to remain open. Do you think that you might have otherwise have needed to close down some of those aerodromes if you had only one flight? Does it enable you to, if you like, stay open for longer with lower traffic, with everybody being in a remote tower center?
I think that we have the capacity of having more people be ready to open up airports during a pandemic burst. Of course, if you only open 1 hour a day on each airport, the problem for us is to keep the endorsement out of how we have designed the concept of having the endorsement. I think that for me, or I should say for the controller, we do have the capacity in the center to have longer opening hours during the pandemic. You can get a lot of hours working on one airport, and the second one only has a few hours can be a part of that RTC endorsement, if I say like that. But I would like to go back to David's discussion before, sorry, Connor, but for me as well, AI or any gadgets you put up on the screen or for the controller isn't always helpful. It's still air traffic service that you perform on the screens. And if I look into the future, I do think that the controllers in the future are a little bit different from the controllers we have today. If I say the old ones, as myself for the last 30 years, I think that controllers in the future need to be more digital operators, operating system, and it will be harder for us to have controllers understanding the three-dimensional parts in the procedure air traffic services. That is at least what I can see from the controllers here. Yeah, sorry, long answer for the wrong question.
No, it's fine. We have a question that's very highly was our highest rated question, and I'd also like to tie that in with a theme that comes up most often. So of the questions that we have, the word multiple comes up a lot. Now we know that multiple is in a much earlier stage of development than single mode operations. We know that it's certainly not licensed anywhere. Certainly something we're still looking at. We then have a question which is the pros and cons from the ATC operators of digital versus traditional in terms of the human performance of stress, flexibility, comfort, and so on. So when you think about the work environment in a digital tower or even a remote tower center, first of all, what are the pros and cons, and how do we play those against what is quite often a desire to eventually one day reach multiple, the provision of ATS to more than one airdrome via a single operator? How do we play those off?
Pros for working in the RTC center, at least for the controllers here, is that normally when they're sitting in the traditional tower, they are single staffed, single operated tower, meaning that you have no social colleagues or you have no colleagues at all at the same time in the center. Here in the RTC, they're sitting side by side, so they can have chat, they can have competence sharing with each other, and normally they also have some kind of technical guy standing behind them that can sort out technical issues quite rapidly. Normally in the old towers, if you have problems, you just call a guy and they might fix it a couple of days later. So there are a lot of pros to go into the RTC center if you normally work in a low density airport. The negative part of working in RTC center, as for myself, I think it's so much nicer to open up a balcony door and go out on the balcony during a sunny day. About the multiple operations, I don't see any benefits of multiple operation for only two airports because we don't going to reduce any staff if we have two airports, because we always need to bear in mind that we might have some kind of emergency situation on one of the airports that needs to split the airports and open up rapidly. But I think that we do have a lot of benefits for smaller airports and some medium airports to be able to be open up for longer times using the multiple airport concept, and also for the controllers to get higher capacity training in the multiple airport concept. I don't know if that was the correct answer for your question, Connor, but multiple for me is on the early stages of something that's going to change a lot in the future. Otherwise, we're going to have as I call it, running hours in the RTC. You have one airport open between 8 and 9, and then you close the airport and the controller rush over to Örnsköldsvik and open up at 9 o'clock. That is, for me, also a multiple concept, meaning that one controller tries to handle two airports during a time period. So we have a lot of challenges for the future, and the subsystem and a simulator system and AI and training, all those things will help us in the future, definitely.
You mentioned simulators there, Eric and Greg. I'm not going to let you go off too lightly here. One of the best uses of simulators in remote tower research and development for us was when it came to prototyping for multiple operations. So when we're looking to the future and the future of remote tower, where's the simulator going to fit into that?
I think it's going to be part of the whole journey. When we think about the change to the operation for the controllers, they have to go through a safe training environment to get used to new methods of working and getting used to new tools. one of the important things that you will go through when you apply a new ATM system or even a new safety net to an operation is you have to get the buy-in of the end user, and the end user doesn't want to get the buy-in in operations. They want to do it in a safe environment. So that's the one key. With regards to AI, I think there's a lot of uses of AI that are going to come through in simulation. I always say to people that buying a simulator isn't expensive, it's running a simulator. So actually things like automated pseudo-piloting, adjacent sector automation, voice recognition systems connected with AI, automatic creation of data, and the evaluation of students, where we're starting to dive into some much more deeper analytics with our customers and with our users, and obviously with experts like yourself, Connor, and your team, making good use of the data and being able to analyze what actually happened in the simulator is really where the benefit will come, and you will start to save large investment down the road by doing small and targeted simulations in the beginning.
Because we saw just towards the end of your presentation, images, and those were simulator images, right?
That's correct. Those are all in R&D with my team at the moment. One of the great advantages of having a team of engineers with time on their hands during COVID is we split them into different teams and said, go and get creative. And they've done some great stuff. So we're very happy to be able to share that with the wider audience now, and there's a lot more to come. But really, we have to be led by industry. We can present concepts and ideas, but it's the team at Saab and the other OEMs that will need to drive what they want in terms of how they want to present to their controllers the tools, and then we'll have to follow suit.
Sure.
But we just want to demonstrate that simulators are flexible. So make use of them in the early days to get the buy-in and also to go through the prototyping with your controllers. So
great. And just to keep you on the hook a little bit, Greg, and to address another question that's come through, which I will then pass to the guys from Saab. Drones and UTM.
Yep.
So I guess it's possible again in the simulator to start looking at how the combination of digital remote tower, drones, etc. Again, you touched on it a bit in your slides. Can you just give a bit more on that?
So drones are a fact of life today. Okay, they're small at the moment. There's a long way to go, in my view, in terms of having them integrated and moving people around, but they're certainly starting to move objects around and being used for surveillance. We only have to see what happened there's been a couple of examples in UAE, but also in London. I'm sure there's others around the world. There's two I'm aware of where an unmanaged drone gets into an operation. Well, the controllers don't know what to do with that today. The aircraft operators are not necessarily clear on what they need to do, and the airspace gets shut in some cases. Way too expensive. So there's that element, but there's also the element of actually, how do you train the controllers to integrate with unmanned traffic? How do those systems talk to each other? We've got the capability for both civil and military drones within our product, and we hope that people will make use of it.
To David, Nicholas, and Eric, do you think remote towers can have an impact on the integration of drones into airspace?
If I start, I think in our sort of research roadmap right now, I think there's two streams. It's how you can integrate UTM and the sort of control and command of that, from the simplest giving just authority to fly, and how that will expand with larger drones and so on in the UTM, ATM mixed environment. And the other one, and I think that for us is a number of years ahead before that has sort of concluded, but it's part of our roadmap for 2023-4. The other one is the counter UAS, as Greg mentioned. How can the counter UAS measures be implemented and used in a remote tower center for maybe larger airport, maybe as a contingency and so on? In counter UAS, time is everything. You need to detect and take actions within very limited time. So these are the two sort of areas of research and development or product development we are performing on that side. Then operationally, I think there's more to think about, Eric.
I think that we have now the possibility to use remote towers for UAS services. I think we have a greater chance to success with it in a better way than in a normal tower, at least from an operational side.
David?
Sorry, David.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Connor, this is a very interesting part about digital towers and UAVs, in that it is an exciting part for the aviation industry. So with COVID-19, we know we suffered a lot as an aviation industry. We've cut down the number of flights and the like. So what's going to happen to controllers? What's going to happen to ANSPs? What's going to happen? That's all in the question mark right now. Well, if you think about it, UAVs, deliveries by Amazon, for example, and stuff, are going to create a completely new airspace, which is the lower portion of the airspace where UAVs travel. And we can't afford to put in control towers everywhere in order to be able to control all of those. So Saab has been involved in a research program with the FAA right now at Griffiths Air Force Base here on how to manage the airspace with UAVs and the like. And I see Digital Tower and the tools that Digital Tower provides and the easiness of installing cameras all over the place in order to be able to control it as an additional incentive for creating jobs in our industry, where ANSPs will grab an additional section of the airspace to control, and new technologies will allow them to do that. And all of a sudden, we're going to need more air traffic controllers to do something that didn't exist before, and now it's coming about. So this is a good story. It's a challenge, but it's a good story.
Thanks. I'm going to ask one more short question before we take a final comment from everybody. And it picks up actually, David, from one of your opening sentences. And it's actually just a bit as simple as the name Remote Tower. Is it time to throw that phrase away and start talking Digital Tower?
This is a real sore subject with me. I've been wanting to change the Remote Tower for a long, long time, since 2015 and the like. I think the name is not as important. I think, sometimes names just take off on their own and you're stuck with it, but it definitely does not reflect what this technology would be providing. It's not for remote airport anymore. It's not for remote areas. It's really more of an overall shift in the technology. Yeah, I don't mind calling it Zoom air traffic control for all that, for all I care. But yes, the digital is probably a better description.
Final words. I suppose one of the lessons that I've seen learned from a number of tenders and projects that have gone on in the last couple of years is don't think about the simulator too late in the program. Think about the simulator very early in the program. And other than that, good luck to everyone with the recovery of COVID, and it's been a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much.
So Eric, remote digital?
Remote digital tower. My final comment is keep it simple. Technical gadgets will not always fix your problem, but it will definitely help you. Take it step by step, and digital towers are definitely here to stay with a simulator integrated. Thank you.
Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I was part of inventing the remote, so I'll say I had to change to digital eventually here, and I think as David say, it's not that. My final words, I think I think it's your slides, and I think we're on the verge of going digital and making it going from a few airports. If we sit here in 2-3 years time, I think we will have maybe definitely a double or probably triple digit of implementations happening. It's growing up. It's amazing. It takes 10 years, but I think we are getting there. And from Saab side, if I just look back where we were 3 years ago and where we are now, it's sort of it's a light year ahead of maturity and understanding and products and so forth. So thank you again for this webinar, Connor. Well done.
David, I asked you the digital remote question, but I didn't give you a chance to have a final comment. So a final comment from you, David?
I want to join Greg and Eric by saying keeping it simple, take it step by step, think of the overall journey, but take it step by step. Always tools being thrown at air traffic controllers is not always the solution. It might confuse things. What we need to do is travel on this journey, take it slowly. Remember, safety is the only thing that air traffic controllers need to be thinking about. And I want to thank you, Connor, for a great job of that you did in moderating this panel, and thank also Dubai Airports and Reed and Micronav and Saab for really putting on something that is really exciting. I was excited to see Eric doing it live.
Great. Thanks, David, and I echo your thanks to the organizers. Remember, everybody, most of you, in fact, are still watching. You've kept with us for this final 13 minutes. Remember to fill in that survey. It really does help. And with that, I will say my own goodbyes and hand back to Daniel. Thank you all.
Thank you, Connor, and thank you to all the attendees that were able to join today. Special thanks to David, Nicholas, and Greg, and especially to Eric for taking us around in that tower. It was very exciting. Connor's mentioned the survey. Please share your feedback. We'll keep continuing to create useful content for you. The remote/digital tower discussion is not over. It's going to continue, and we'll make sure that the content is curated to what you want. We're also arranging meetings with our speakers for all attendees. So mention in the questionnaire who you would like to meet to continue these discussions, and we have a team that will assist you with that. Our next webinar takes place on 1st September. It focuses on another very interesting topic, passenger experience and how it's changing at airports. We'll send you all invites for that, and we hope to see you there. On behalf of Reed Exhibitions and our speakers, once again, thank you all very much for being here. Stay safe, everyone, and goodbye.